Monday night.
It's our Monday night family home evening.
Which we don't normally do, but we are
But we're
today.
starting to do it more religiously.
Okay. I discovered last week that it was really exciting to do a journal on tape of a couple of very old friends who are in their 80s, and they've never done this, and we had a great time doing theirs. So we thought that we would do ours for our children. And so we're going to start with George's tape, and I'll ask him the questions, and he will enlarge upon the answers. So tell us again where you were born, George.
Oh, I was born in Calgary, Alberta in 1927, October the 19th, 1927. And as I recall, my mother had me at the Grace Hospital. I think it was in Hillhurst somewhere. Kind of a special hospital for births. At the time, that's where they did handle most of the births in Calgary.
Can you tell me some of your earlier memories? Like, what do you remember of your childhood before school? Any great, exciting little episodes that we'd like to know about?
Oh yeah, I can remember quite a bit, but my earliest memory that I think I can remember was in Moose Jaw.
You moved to Moose Jaw then?
Yeah, apparently my dad had been a Maytag salesman in Calgary in the 1927 or 8 era, and then he had been quite successful, so he got promoted, or he got the opportunity to be a branch manager, and he moved us. He moved his wife, my mother, and they moved to Moose Jaw, and so I must have been born in Calgary in 1927, but then in the next few years he moved to Moose Jaw, and we lived there in a place on Redland Avenue. And I remember the house. It was a normal 2-story house, and it had a long banister in it, a set of steps that came down near the front door. And my earliest memories were that I must have been around age 3 or 4. And I remember sliding down the stairs, bumping down. It was fun. They were wooden stairs, you see, and they were varnished. They were dark in color. And I remember my friend from across the street. I had a girlfriend at that age. And I remember she was really nice because her name was Georgina. And she lived across the street. And I remember she used to come over to our house, and we would bump down the stairs. And I also remember laying on the bed with my dad, and he would giggle, and he would make me giggle. He would tickle me so badly, and I remember how it really did almost make me explode, because he would tickle me a lot, and we would romp on the bed quite a bit. And so I remember being tickled, and laughing a lot with my dad. And I do remember my mother making breakfast, and we had a pantry. It was kind of plain, because I remember porridge. And then I recall that my dad was quite worried about business, and he used to actually walk to work from Redland Avenue, about 3 blocks to the main street, and then down the main street in Moose Jaw. And there was a big, long hill, and I remember him carrying me in his arms. So I must have been 3 or 4 years old. And I can remember the cold weather and the fact that it was frosty, and we had warm clothing. He would carry me all the way down to his store, which was right in the main street of Moose Jaw.
So you went to work with him. Tell me, is this when your mother used to work at the shop with him, and she used to demonstrate the ironer? There was an electric Maytag ironer.
Yeah, I know. There was a very special.
So your mother must have gone to work with you, or why would he take you?
She might have gone sometimes. I don't remember her being there, but I do remember the ironer, and I remember the store. It was a plain store, and he had a washing machine in each of the 2 windows. And the one thing that I do recall that surprised me was that would get these washing machines in big crates, about 3 feet by 4 feet high, and he could actually lift the whole washing machine and the crate right up in his arms and packed it into the back of a car to transport it. So that was interesting. Those were things that kind of amazed me at the time. He had a good shop in the back of the Maytag store. And I started learning a few things about nuts and bolts even at the back of the store. And I don't remember much else about Moose Jaw, other than the fact that a couple of my friends and I would sometimes go up to the top of this hill. I don't remember much else about Moose Jaw, other than the fact that a couple of my friends and I would sometimes go up to the top of this hill from the main street, and there was a big garage there that housed old fire engines. In fact, I think they were horse-drawn fire engines. And I remember we would go in this big old garage and a barn-type building, and we would play on these big old fire engines that were in storage. And I also remember at Redland Avenue that we had quite a bit of fun there, and one of my friends was Lloyd Lockwood. He lived on Grafton Avenue about 5 blocks away. But he would come over to our place once in a while. And I do remember jumping off the roof at the back of the house once, and I didn't realize it was so high, and it was really hard on me. It was too far. I think it was about 10 feet high, and I nearly broke my ankles. But I can recall that we sort of lived on a hill, or close to the top of the hill, and when it was raining, we would go over to the edge of the hill where the road started to go downhill, and we would make great rivers, and I would enjoy playing in the mud and making little places for boats to sail in the river and redirect the water.
Digging new channels.
Digging channels, and as a matter of fact, I still like doing it. So I guess that's where I got my first experience in making rivulets and directing water viaducts.
Which, by the way, he does to this day. He builds water slides now.
Yes. I even build water slides, and when the water runs around our house, I guide it down around the
root
garden.
cellar.
Yeah. So I still do play around with water rivulets.
Well, that's neat. How old do you think you might have been when you moved away from Moose Jaw?
Probably around 5 years old, I believe, and I don't recall much about the move other than the fact that my mother and I were on a bus coming into Calgary, and I remember the bus came into town, and she kept telling me to watch for Grandpa. This was her father, Grandpa Etheridge, and when we got close to the bus station, she pointed him out, and there he was, standing up tall and straight, and it was a cold day, and I remember he had a sort of a, because it was so cold, he had red cheeks and red nose, and he was nicely dressed with a nice gray coat on and hat on, and that was the first time I remember seeing my Grandpa Etheridge. Right at the bus station, at the Greyhound bus station.
They came to pick you up.
Oh yeah, he came with his car, and we got off the bus, and then he got our suitcases, and we went home with him. And of course, I was really amazed at the beautiful home that he had. It was much better quality and nicer rooms, and I didn't know what was going on at the time business-wise, but I remember it was an awful strain on my mother, and apparently she had agreed to take me back to Calgary while my dad stayed in Moose Jaw and tried to work things out in the business. Now, I think that was around 1929.
Well, he stayed in Moose Jaw?
Yeah, or 1930 or 1931, because it was in the worst part of the Depression, and the only thing I knew about it was that he had sold all kinds of washing machines, and some of them were on contracts, and if people didn't pay, he had to take them back. So I gather now, as I think back about it, that he probably had a very difficult time because he had to repossess many machines, and then the people would not pay on the contracts, and so it must have meant that my dad had a very difficult financial problem, like most other people in the Depression. He probably had to close the shop or close the store, and I do recall that in a matter of 6 months or a year or something like that, he came back to Calgary to live with us, and then that's when we moved next door to my grandfather's place. It was 701 First Avenue Northwest. We rented a house, and my grandfather's house was 703 First Avenue Northwest.
So you were next door to him?
We lived right next door.
And did you start school in Calgary then?
Yeah, I do recall my first year in school because my teacher was Miss Scott, and it was at the Sunnyside Bungalow School. Now,
excuse me, I just want to interrupt you for a minute. I think that your mother, probably sometime in Saskatchewan, had a second child who died.
Maybe, I didn't know it.
She did. You were 2 years old, and she had a child,
a
little boy, and he died within a month or two.
Yeah.
And he was buried in Calgary.
Somewhere.
He was buried in Calgary.
Yeah, and I think his name was Donald.
His name was Donald. And then she had Patricia.
Then she had Patricia in about 1933.
Okay, so at this point, you were old enough almost to go to school, and Patricia wasn't born yet, right?
That's right.
Okay. Now, your first school teacher.
Yeah, Miss Scott. And I do recall going to grade 1 at Sunnyside Bungalow. And by that time I had started to realize a few things, and that my grandfather had built that school. He had a contracting firm, and he and his men had built the Sunnyside Bungalow School. So it sort of felt like home. And it was only a block away from our house.
Had you ever been there while he was building it?
No, it was all finished when we got there. And it was a nice school, about 7 or 8 rooms. It went from grade 1 to grade 6.
This teacher, is this the one your mother told me that she really thought so much of you, you were a teacher's pet?
Well, that gave me the story.
She skipped you to grade 2, didn't she?
No.
She held you back.
She held me back.
She held you back after.
I remember doing these plus and minus signs and a few things like that, but I don't think I was too good in school, and she made me do grade 1 over again.
Well, your mother thought it was because she wanted you in her class again.
Yeah, that was my mother's
prejudiced idea, maybe.
Anyway, I took grade 1 twice, and apparently I did a little better the next time, so then I got to grade 2, the Staples, and that was the first time I started taking any notice of girls. There were 2 or 3 girls in the class. Other than that, before that, I just knew that they were friends and acquaintances, but then there were 2 or 3 girls in grade 2 that were very bright, and I remember Doris, and a few other girls that lived in our Sunnyside area. And then I don't remember much about school other than I went through grade 3 and 4 and 5. Then I had a man teacher in grade 5.
Do you remember any great times with your family that you picnicked or did any fun things when you were that young?
Oh yes, we had a routine. My grandfather had a 1928 Pontiac, and it was a nice car, but the only way you could start it was with a crank at the front. It didn't have starters or anything. So it was parked at the front of our house most of the time, and I remember that he used to take us to church in it at the Pillars Baptist Church. And usually after church on Sundays, if the day was nice, we would go for a drive. And we often went to St. George's Island, looked at the animals.
Which is the dinosaur park.
Dinosaur park. And,
did they have dinosaurs then?
Oh yeah, they had dinosaurs early anyway. They were building them. I remember that they were just building something like that. And we went there for a few years.
But they had a zoo there.
Yeah, always lots of animals to look at. We went as a family. That is, my grandparents and my parents. It was just them and us. There weren't any others around, except Ethel lived at My Aunt Ethel lived at my grandfather's house. You see, all his other children had grown up and got married. But Ethel didn't get married, so she had a special room at the back. It was a fancy room.
Best of everything.
Yeah, she had the best of everything.
But she was working and probably earned it.
Oh yeah, she worked for F.R. Webster, who owned 3 or 4 hotels. The Queens and the Love Hotel.
No,
and
the York. They owned the York.
New York, and she was his personal secretary, and she had a beautiful big office down in the Greyhound building over top of the bus station. So as I got older, when I got a bicycle, I remember going downtown and how I used to stop in to see my Aunt Ethel at her fancy office.
At the hotel.
No, it was in the building, the Greyhound building, about the 6th floor. Well, they ran the hotels, but they had their own separate office.
So here you are in grade 6. Where did you go to school then? Hillhurst
Well,
was 2, yeah.
In Hillhurst, I had Mr. Gillespie in grade 5, and then I had Miss Curry in grade 6. And the work wasn't too hard. I found it quite easy. And I remember in mathematics that she would give us a big, long multiplication question about 3 o'clock. And the deal was that if anybody could get the exact right answer, multiplying it out and dividing it, or vice versa, to prove that it was right, then we could get out early.
Oh.
So lots of times I got out at 3:30.
What did you do when you got up early?
Well, mostly
You didn't
remember
go
my
straight
bicycle.
Oh.
Yeah, I remember going to the store across from the school once in a while, but normally I'd go home for a block's walk, and then I eventually persuaded my mother I needed a bicycle, so they got me a cheaper bike at first, kind of a red colored one, and I remember taking it apart, fixing it, painting it. Then I do remember that they finally bought me a real good one.
CCM, no doubt.
Yeah, CCM. So,
So how old were you here?
well, I think I must have been around 12 to 13. And I remember a few different things with my bike. One of them was that I would ride up to the schoolyard a lot. And I remember that I had a $2 bill once, which was a rare thing for me. And I had ridden up to the school, and I had ridden around the school a lot, and I was practicing riding without any handlebars, without holding onto the handlebars. And when I got home, I couldn't find my $2 bill. And it was a disaster, because that was the most money I ever had in my life. But I do recall that somehow I found it. I remember going back up there and looking around the swings, and I did find it. And I also remember that I used to love milk, and I thought it was good for me. So when I got to be about 13 or 14, I used to ride all the way downtown, which would be about 2 miles. And on around 5th Avenue, there was a dairy, a Palm Dairy. And they used to sell milk out of a spout right in their front office there. They had a spout, and you could bring a bottle in and get it filled. I think it was only 25 cents.
Probably less.
So I remember I used to carry a gallon bottle down there and get it filled, and then hold it over my shoulder and drive the bike home. And that way we had a couple of gallons of milk for me to drink each week, which I really did enjoy.
Great. You used to go to the Dad's cookie store too, didn't you?
Yeah, but that was later in life. That was when I was in my teenage years.
They all had storefront sales, didn't they? You know, the bakeries you could buy at the front.
Yeah, they seemed to sell discounted
day-old baked bread and broken cookies in Dad's cookies
cookies
shop.
and biscuits, if you went to their shop.
So now, how old are you?
Well, I went through Hillhurst Junior High, and that was when I started. I wouldn't think I was pretty good. I did grade 7, 8, and 9, and I used to apply myself to my studies. I remember Bob Hatfield was the smartest kid in the class. A very nice guy. And his brother had gone ahead of him about 2 years ahead, and they were just brilliant people.
And I got to know Bob pretty well, and I knew John Kirby. He lived in Sunnyside, and Edgar Ingleson. And we used to play ball together, and Edgar wanted to be a great pitcher. So I used to catch the ball for him a lot. We would go over on the Sunnyside Boulevard there, and there's big lawns along by the river. So we played a lot of catch. We learned how to fix our bikes pretty well. And Grant Alger was another one of my friends at junior high school. And I applied myself pretty well, so I used to get 80 or 90 in most of the tests. Edgar and I were about even, and then Bob Hatfield was always in the 98s and 100%. He was the class president and so on. And I don't remember much about high school other than I took square dancing, which was a bit embarrassing, but it was a little fun. And then I also took basketball, played quite a bit of basketball and baseball. I was good at baseball. So it was a good time, and my main teacher was Mr. Watts. He was the principal of the school.
What grade was this?
I was 7, 8, and 9, and we had to write exams in 9, yeah. So we wrote the exams and got promoted to high school. And at that point, I had a choice as to whether to go to Crescent Heights High, which was an academic school, or whether to go to Western Canada High, which was downtown, an industrial type school. To my surprise, Bob Hatfield went to Western Canada,
Industrial.
even though he was an academic type.
Really?
But a few of us, like Gordon Jepson and me, went to Crescent Heights. And Gordon used to come down First Avenue and collect me in the morning, and then we would walk up the hill to Crescent Heights High every morning. I tried basketball in high school, but I found it was too hard because you had to get up about 5 in the morning.
Practice.
Yeah, and I didn't like that, so I didn't go into too much high school or basketball in high school. But I kept up my studies. I had a teacher named Miss Giles in Latin, and I enjoyed mathematics, chemistry, physics, and I did all right in English and Latin. So by the time I ended high school, I managed to get up to the higher marks. I was in the 95 rating group.
Straight A student.
But there's still two guys, Albert Goodjohn and his friend, that could usually always beat me. So I thought I was pretty safe, and that I could go to university. And so anyway, I wrote the exams, and I did get pretty good marks, anywhere from 82 to 97. And I got a good diploma. So I took it in my hand, and I went over to see the principal, Mr. Hutchinson. And you had to get his approval and signature before you could go to university.
Were you in grade 12 by this time?
Yeah, that's when I wrote the
Okay,
grade
well,
12 exams.
can we just back up a little here?
Mm-hmm.
When did you decide to go in to be a doctor? Because when I met you, you had nothing else on your mind but to be a doctor.
Yeah, well, my parents
So you're
encouraged
still grade
me.
12 here.
Yeah, they encouraged me to be a doctor in grade 10 and 11 and 12. They talked about it a lot, and they admired my uncle George, who was a doctor in the Falkland Islands. And he had won the Order of the British Empire. I guess it was in 42 that the Grass Bay, a German ship, was sunk near the Falkland Islands. Yeah. And a whole lot of the sailors were rescued out of the sea. And they took them to his hospital, and then he managed to nurse a lot of them back to health. And so he got an OBE for that.
Well, what was the name of the particular island that he practiced on?
It was called Falkland Islands.
No, there was another island where his wife died, and they had to carry her over the mountains for miles.
Oh, I don't know that. I don't remember that.
Oh, your Uncle George told us.
Yeah, well, that might be true, but Nora, his wife, died down there.
Yeah, and apparently the natives helped him carry her for miles over the mountains to take her to a burial place closer to the town that he worked in.
Oh, yeah. Well, he worked in the Falkland Islands for about 6 or 10 years. And I remember after we got married, and we were living in 57th Avenue Southwest, he did write us and ask us if we would like to have a holiday and meet him in Rio de Janeiro. I guess he thought that was great, but you and I talked about it and we turned it
We were
down.
pretty broke at
Yeah,
that
we said it wasn't our desire to do that. But that's jumping ahead because that's after we got married.
Yeah, we'll get back to grade 12 here. You used to ride your bicycle up to my place.
Yeah, it was while I was in grade 11 and 12 that we had to move back into my grandfather's house. Actually, my dad had managed to keep feeding us by selling fuller brushes for a few years. And then he got to selling Electroluxes in about 46 and 47. And he was very good at it. But in the meantime, when we had those difficult times, we moved into a 4-room suite over my grandfather's house, at the top of the grandfather's house. And it had an outside entrance, if you recall. Stairways went up the side. And so we lived there for quite a few years in that suite, and it was quite pleasant. My dad and I used to do the dishes a lot. My mother made the meals, of course.
For your grandparents, too?
No, she just cooked for us.
Didn't she look after your grandma?
Yeah, she looked after my grandma, who was very ill, and she was in the back bedroom, main floor. But I remember during those years that, during the war years, they stopped making Electroluxes, so my dad used to buy groups of vacuum cleaners. He found there were some of these vacuum cleaners, used ones, available, and he would get 20 or 30 or 40 at a time. And I had a shop at the back in my grandfather's garage, and I fixed it up with a motor and a buffer, and my dad worked with me and taught me how to clean them up and fix them, and so I really got into that. I would often go home from school at 4 o'clock and then work for an hour or two in the shop, fixing up vacuum cleaners.
Put in new brushes, reset the hoses.
Yeah, and put in new bearings, and I would get them ready by Friday or Saturday. He would have ads in the paper to sell them Friday and Saturday, and if I had 3 or 4 or 5 of them all shined up and working good, he would sell them on the weekend. So we managed to get by for a few years that way, and then after the war, Electrolux got back into production, and he was one of the first men to go back on their force.
That was in 45 or 6.
Yeah, 45 or 6. And so I was only 17 then, and a little too young to get into the Air Force just as the war quit. But I remember that he managed to sell quite a few Electroluxes, and so he was starting to make some better money. He was making a couple of $1,000s a month when he could sell them, and he'd take me out on the odd demonstration as long as I didn't say anything. I was allowed to sit and listen.
Yes.
And I watched him demonstrate, sell the machines, how he helped him carry them. It worked out pretty good, but by that time my dad had saved up about $1,000. And I remember he wanted to get into another house because he did not like living at my grandfather Etheridge's place.
His in-laws.
Yeah, it was his in-laws, and I guess he felt that he wanted to be the supporter of the family, and now he was making some money, so it was around that time that my grandfather had remarried. My grandmother, Elizabeth Amy Eden, had died in about 42, I guess, just at the start of the war. My grandfather was lonely, and a year or two later he decided to marry this Ethel Pfeiffer. And she wasn't a bad type.
She was his housekeeper, wasn't she?
Well,
I
maybe
understood.
partly, but
No.
she was quite nice. And
After you moved out of your grandpa's place,
yeah, they were living there while we were living
and your
there.
grandma died,
Yeah,
then he had a housekeeper.
yeah, I guess so.
That was her.
Then he married her, yeah, and he said he wanted to have a companion, so I thought it was all right. But she didn't get along very well with Ethel. You know, they were both named Ethel. Ethel Etheridge and Ethel Pfeiffer didn't get along. My mother sort of was a peacemaker, and she tried to get along with them all. But my dad wanted to move, so I remember he'd saved $1,000, and then he wanted to get this nice house up on Sydenham Road. And
Mount
he
Royal
had
area.
found it, yeah, and he got a good deal on it. But he had to raise a couple more thousand. And the only way he could do it he talked to these people who would rent the second story, and he got them to pay a year's rent in advance. And that meant they had the second story, and we had the first story and the third story. And so they agreed to it, and this Muriel, I forget her last name, and her mother.
McLean, Mrs.
Yeah,
McLean was your
that's
mother.
right, yeah. Muriel McLean, and they moved in there, and they were very pleasant types. And Muriel could play the pianos. It's just beautiful. So we used to have lots of piano playing. It resounded over the whole house. And I remember George Alexander. Of course, he was the main mover, and I had worked with him a little. And he had to hoist that piano up to the second story by putting a chain block on the third story, and the chains around
Hauling it up outside the
hauled it
house.
up outside and in through a window. A really amazing engineering feat.
That was Mrs. McLean's
Yeah,
piano.
but he got it in there all right. And then, as you recall, while we lived in Sydenham, I was well, I guess I had met you once or twice on the hill, Center Street Hill, because you were working at Webb's clothing store.
Do you remember how we met?
Yeah, I remember we went out to see Doris and Laura.
They were living in your basement.
Yeah, in my grandfather's basement.
Right. And Laura?
Laura was babysitting for you.
She was looking after the family. My mom and dad had gone to the coast.
Yeah.
But Ethel, or the way we connected here was that Laura, who we heard about Laura through my cousin Jim O'Reilly.
Oh, yeah.
And he was engaged to her, and he recommended her to come and stay with us while my mom and dad went away.
Oh, yeah, I met
and
Jim.
you used to bring the mail up almost every day.
Brilliant Max Sexsmith.
Doris was her cousin. They
And
came together.
I really liked Max because he could play the fiddle and the guitar.
Yeah.
And he taught me how to play the guitar. And
Did he teach you?
oh,
I
yeah.
didn't know
So it was really a pleasant time. And then I would go up there to visit or take the mail up, and then I met you and your sister.
that. But we didn't go out. You used to come over with the mail, but we didn't really date.
No, it
until
wasn't
a year
until
later when she got married to Jim.
Yeah, that's
Jim
right.
O'Reilly and Laura got married.
Laura got married to Jim O'Reilly, and then I met you on the Center Street Bridge once going to work. And then we made a date, I think.
No, actually, we were at her trousseau tea. My sister and I were dressed as twins, like we always did, and we were serving at her trousseau tea.
Where was that at?
At somebody's house, and your mom was there at the tea. And after you came to pick your mother up, and then your mother said, "Do you think we could drive Florence home?"
Oh, I see.
And so, or you said, "Would you like a ride home?" And your mom and you and I drove home.
Mm-hmm.
Marie's boyfriend had picked her up, but I was still there helping with the cleanup. And you drove me home, and then you came over once in a while. The first time you ever came over after that was you were on your way to the dump, and you dropped in to see if I'd like to ride along to the dump with
You mean I was going to the dump in those days?
Exactly. So
Which dump?
What's new? I don't know. You take a bunch of stuff to the dump.
Is that right?
That's right. My first date.
Well, isn't
I
that
ever
something?
went anywhere with you.
I'll have to take you to the dump here in Murphy's Lake sometime.
Oh,
show you what it's like.
Please, I can hardly wait.
I'll just retrace a few points here. While we lived at Sydenham Road, it was a beautiful house, and as I recall, it was granite stonework on the foundation.
Brick house.
And it was a brick house, and it had 3 stories, and it was on a nice curved street called Sydenham Road in Calgary. That's Sydenham in Mount Royal. And so we felt very happy and actually successful to be able to get into a house like that.
In that beautiful area.
Yeah, it's a beautiful area, and we just had previously lived on First Avenue in Sunnyside, which was a plain area. But once we got moved into Sydenham, I firstly I remember building the cupboards and putting in the suite upstairs for Doug Honeyman.
What a memory.
And he and his wife had just been married, and they lived there. He sold insurance. And then I built 2 suites in the basement with my dad's help. Like, we worked together, and so we had 3 rented suites, 1 in the attic and 2 in the basement. And we had about 4 rooms on the main floor. 4 or 5, and a nice bathroom. I was lucky. I had the right front room with a fireplace in it. It was kind of like the den, and a good bedroom. And then we had a tennis court outside that I fixed up and made it nice and clean, but I never did play much tennis. And that's when I recall that I was seeing you once in a while, and I remember Delmer came over once with his Model T, and he brought you over in his Model T.
Yeah, how did he know where you lived?
Well, he knew Calgary pretty well. So I remember him driving you all the way over to Sydenham Road, and it was a very plain Model T. But,
in fact, it had no top.
It was a thrill. Yeah, it was an open Model T. And it ran pretty good, and so that was exciting. And I was planning on being a student for years and going to university. And when I could not get in to university in Edmonton because they were overloaded in the medical field, I wrote and found I could get into UBC. I wrote and found I could get into UBC at second year university, because grade 12 in Alberta was worth grade 13 in BC.
Oh, that's how it worked.
So I got in there, and then I moved out to Vancouver. I felt that I had a few relatives there because my Uncle Donald and Aunt Nita lived there in Vancouver, and my Aunt Lottie and Uncle Maynard. I looked around and found a place to rent up towards the university, but it was still about 2 or 3 miles from the university. And I got this upstairs room from this lady that was quite pleasant. And I started applying myself to the studies. And then, to my surprise, I found that you had moved out to Haney with your folks.
You knew that before you moved out there.
I knew that it was a possibility, yeah. And
no, you sold my bike for me so I could afford to take the train.
Oh, did I?
And you took me to the train station when I left. My mom and dad had gone on by car.
Oh, yeah.
And you sold my bike for me.
Oh.
In fact, Doris might have bought it.
So anyway, you got some money to...
It was a brand new bike, and I'd only had it a few months. And I had no money to take the train. So my mom said, you'll have to sell your bike. And you said, well, I could probably sell it for her.
But I think that it was about November before I got in touch with you, wasn't it?
I don't know.
I think the school year started in September, and October I was struggling along. It was raining most of the time. I met a few guys at university that were taking law. And then I think I got in touch with you and found out you were living somewhere out there in Haney. But it was an awful difficult place to find.
To get to without a car.
Yeah, so I don't think we saw each other till about November. And then only briefly. And I remember putting in my time and studying, and it got to be very depressing because of the terrible rain. Cold weather, my feet were cold and they were wet. I had no warm, cozy place to live. This was a big old house the lady had. And I remember buying a sewing machine out of the paper and fixing it up and putting a motor on it. But I had a little difficulty selling it. However, I think I did eventually sell that for $80. That was making an electric sewing machine out of a pedal type. But it was slow going. And I was starting to get dismayed at this medical pre-med course because I was taking this stinking fish out of a barrel each morning and cutting it and drawing the nerve system and the blood system. And my hands were all covered with this formaldehyde every day at the university, and I found it was very unpleasant. And it wasn't the kind of thing that I wanted to do personally, because I had fixed appliances up and worked on vacuum cleaners, and I was excited with that. I liked doing things with my hands.
And turning it over into money
and making a profit. I could make a profit on sewing machines and vacuum cleaners, but I could only see this terrible problem of going thousands of dollars into debt by staying
and working 9 years before you could make money.
I figured I'd be 9 years before I could ever make $1, and I would be at least $9,000 in the hole, starting a practice in a field that I didn't like. So once I realized I didn't like it, I wasn't doing too well, and it was about January. I realized in the chemistry class that I couldn't see the colors on the precipitates, because you had to determine what the precipitates were and all these chemical reactions. And when I realized that I could not tell the colors, it came to me that I was not destined to be a doctor. Because if doctors have to know colors like that, and I couldn't see them, I was not qualified.
And it was an out for you.
Yeah, so anyway, I wrote my dad and told him, and he was very disappointed, because he had hoped that I would be a doctor. And I told my Uncle Donald, and he wasn't happy, but my dad came out and talked it over with me, and I was fairly convincing. I just told him that I had figured it out, and it was not worth it. I would rather live by my wits than go through a miserable educational period and then end up in debt. It just didn't add up in my book. Now, it might have been all right for some people. I suppose if you came from a medical family and your uncles and your parents were all doctors and they were going to support you all the way through, it'd be all right, but I didn't have that. So, my dad did agree it might be better if I quit. And so I made a deal with you that I would go back to Calgary and try to earn some money, and then when we got some money together, we would get married. And it turned out that just as I got back...
And you gave me my ring.
Yeah, I did give you an engagement ring.
In October, wasn't it?
No, I think it was...
It was in October. I think it was in October.
It was February or March that I quit university. So it must have been March.
Okay.
Anyway, when I went back to Calgary, oddly enough, my dad had just sold the Sydenham house. And he was going to start working on this house on 13th Avenue, which was kind of pleasant. And I remember he had 2 or 3 suites in it. So I helped him put in a concrete walk at the back, and I helped him build some suites. It was 47, I think. And at that time, he had agreed that I'd worked a lot for him and done a lot of good work for him, and he appreciated it. And so he said he would owe me $1,000, and when and if I could get married, that he would pay us $1,000. Because it was for work that I had done, you see. Mm-hmm. And then I wrote you, and I think we got married in March of 48, didn't we? April of 48, yeah. So I worked all that winter with my dad and helped him do this and that. And he managed to sell that house on 13th Avenue and made a better deal on one up on 26th Avenue Southwest. So he made a little profit on that one, and we got moved up to 26th Avenue, and I helped him with a few suites up there and got them sort of partly organized.
That was after we got married.
Yeah.
Oh, no. For 2 months, just before, we had to postpone the wedding, which was supposed to be in February. And
yeah.
We postponed it because you had to help him with that one.
Yeah, I had to help him get that place fixed up, and then once he got it rolling and he got the suites rented, yeah, well, it was sort of clear for me to go. And so I went out, and I remember I just arrived in Vancouver the day before we were getting married. My uncle Maynard and Aunt Lottie put me up for one night and then drove me out to the wedding. I was very nervous. I didn't really know what I was doing for sure, but you did a great job of getting it organized. We had a nice wedding and a nice reception at the hotel in New Westminster.
Russell Hotel.
The Russell Hotel, yeah. And I really appreciated how well it was organized.
It was small.
Even though I had never done it before and I was terribly nervous. I suppose I could go through it again quite easily, but at that time I was really worried. And at second year university, because grade 12 in Alberta was worth grade 13 in BC. Retired and living at 5599 Enright Road in Macleese Lake. And we're having our family home evening night. And Florence has found that she could make these recording tapes, giving a lot of history for some of her people that she visits for the church. And so we decided that we would try the same thing for ourselves, because someday our grandchildren or great-grandchildren might want to hear what we sound like. So So we're going to go over a few facts in the life of Florence M. Kinneard. Now, Florence, how are you feeling tonight?
Lucky.
Lucky.
Lucky. I was lucky the day I was born.
Yeah, and here you've made it to, what age are you now?
65.
Imagine that, 65 years old.
I didn't ask you on your side.
No, but we like our children to know our ages.
And you're 67.
Yeah, I'm 67. But anyway, let's go back to the day you were born and give us an outline of the first memories that you can recall.
First of all, I was born at home with a midwife. I was the third child my mom had, and I was her birthday present. My sister was her first
Birthday because you were born on her birthday?
On her birthday. She was 20 when Marie was born on her birthday, and then she had Dell the next August, and the following July I was born on her birthday, on her 22nd birthday.
Isn't that amazing that you and your sister were both born on the same day of the year
That Mom
that
was
your
born.
mother's birthday? So it's really more than a coincidence.
Yeah. Blessings, we were.
You were real blessed.
Anyway, we were only 3 children for 7 years. So for 7 years, I had a very spoiled life.
And where did you live at that time?
We were living, well, when I was born, I think I was born in Rostern, Saskatchewan. And after I was maybe a few months old or a year old, we moved to Laird, where my dad's father and mother lived.
Was that in Saskatchewan?
Yeah, it was a few miles away.
From what big city?
From Rostern. Oh, I don't know, near Saskatoon somewhere.
Oh, somewhere near Saskatoon.
I think. So anyway, we lived in Laird, not far from my grandfather Peters and his wife.
No, grandfather Peters was mother or father's son?
Actually, he was my dad's stepfather. My father's real father, Dyke, Isaac Dyke,
Yes.
first, died when he was about 30.
Yeah.
But Grandpa Peters was Grandma's second husband, and she had 5 children when she married Grandpa Peters.
Oh, yeah.
So after that, she had 6 more, 11 in total.
I see.
But they lived in Laird, and my dad was married and needed to make a living, and his father had taught him how to be a tinsmith, because his father was a sheet metal man,
Yeah, he was
they
a sheet
call it
metal.
today.
Yeah.
But he taught my dad everything he knows about tinsmithing
That's in Saskatchewan.
in Saskatchewan, and he used to put in furnaces and stuff. But my grandpa also did another thing for extra money, I guess. He used to build coffins for anybody in the area that died. They
Oh.
would come to him for the coffin.
Wooden coffins.
Wooden coffins, and he would build them sort of like the shape that they used to do in the olden days, with a wider part up here, and
shoulders.
narrowed for the feet, you know. And I remember I remember going to their place, and we used to love going there.
Is that the first memories you can get?
I can remember that.
How about how old were you then?
Well, maybe we were not living there anymore, but I can remember visiting Grandma and Grandpa's house.
Yeah. When you were 5 or 6?
No, I was only between 2 and 4, because we left Saskatchewan at the age of 4.
Yes.
But I can remember things about my grandma, like she must have weighed 300 pounds. She was a very, very big lady.
That was Grandma Dyke.
No, my dad's mother. And she had dropsy, which is a very unusual disease today, but it just, you get bigger and bigger and bigger until
The
you
legs
drop,
swell
I
up
guess.
first, don't they?
No, everything. She was big all over. But she was a loving grandma, and she used to make cookies for us and stuff. And when Mom and Dad were visiting with them, we would go hide in the closets and hide behind her skirts, and we were real shy kids. Anyway. But then my dad and Mom moved to a homestead, because you could buy a homestead. Well, you could have one for nothing as long as you did a certain amount of work on it
Oh, yeah.
every year, like a mineral claim now. But you'd get 160 acres, and you could keep it forever as long as you did a little more work on it
So
each
what
year.
area was that in?
That was in, I don't know, around Laird somewhere,
Around Saskatchewan.
in Saskatchewan. So I can remember my dad built a log house, and it had no floor. It had a dirt floor. And it was on the side hill, because I can remember we had a little chicken coop up there. There were chickens up there, and this rooster used to chase me, and I know I wasn't more than 2.5, and it just didn't like me. It used to chase me every time I was anywhere near it. And we had a little dog, black and white terrier, and his name was Trixie, her name. And I remember going for walks with Mom and Dad, and I always got to ride on Dad's shoulder because I was the baby. And we used to walk over our holdings, you know.
Yeah.
And I can remember a swamp area where he always had to carry me because it was like quicksand, and we had to be careful that we didn't step in any of the soft spots. And then there was a time that a friend of theirs moved to the homestead adjoining ours, and we spent a lot of time over there while Dad helped him build his place. And I can remember him mixing cement in this big tub he made about the size of a single bed. And he would mix the cement or plaster or something and fill the cracks in his log cabin.
That's what we used to do.
And we had outhouses. And they were happy years. And then when I was about 4.5, my dad couldn't find any work because there was no, well, it was the Depression.
Well, what year were you born again?
29. So in about 33, the Depression was nearly over.
Yeah, it was still
But
bad time.
still there was no work. And so my dad rode the rails, like he jumped on a boxcar. Hundreds and hundreds of people out of work did this during the 30s. And they would ride the boxcars to wherever they thought they could get work. And he rode to Alberta. And he found a farm to work on. Actually, he had been diagnosed with TB. Not serious TB, but he was in the beginning stages of tuberculosis, and they said that he shouldn't work inside, that he should have an outside job. And so he thought if he went to Alberta and got a job working outside on the farm, that it would be good for his health. So he went on ahead on a boxcar, and he found work in a little place named Airdrie, Alberta.
Well, just north of Calgary.
I don't know where it is.
Yeah, it's about 24 miles north of Calgary.
Really? I didn't know.
Matter of fact, my friend Peter lives there now.
Yeah?
Calgary has grown so much that it's taken over Airdrie now.
See, maybe it wasn't Airdrie. Because I wasn't that close to Calgary. It was more like near Olds. It was, I don't know.
Well, it was somewhere between Airdrie and Olds.
Yeah. And at that time, I guess I was becoming 6 years old. Or I must have just turned 6. No, I was 4.5. There. And then we moved to another place near Olds. And I remember my dad worked at this farm, and the boss's name was Mr. Cook. And my dad tended the cattle and in the wintertime and fed all the stock and pitched hay and did whatever a farmer does.
Where did
And
you
my
live
mother
at?
cooked. Well, we lived quite a ways away. No, we lived in the cookhouse.
In the cookhouse on
I
the
think
cook
so.
farm.
On the cook farm, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we had the use of one horse. And Mom and Dad had a lot of friends around there that they had made since we moved there. And they had a place they called the Grange, and it was like a community hall.
Yeah.
And they had dances and whist drives and lots of community things going on, so that whenever anything was happening, my mom and dad would take us kids. Everybody took their kids, and we'd get in the sleigh and we'd go to this whist drive or dance or whatever.
There was a hall or something.
A big hall, and the kids, we would just sit quietly on the side benches, you know, while they were dancing and having a wonderful time, and then they would of course eat. Eventually they'd serve food, and we would get to have some of that, and then while they were dancing we would go find a coat and sleep on it, either in the closet or on the bench or something, yeah. So, and then when it was time to go home, they'd wrap us up and wake us up and put us in the sleigh, and away we'd go again. And because they knew so many people around there and had so many friends, we used to go to their place for Christmas, or they'd come over. And this horse disliked my mom. He really disliked her. And if the horse knew that my mom was on the sleigh, it would stop, and it wouldn't move.
Huh.
And so my dad would have to tell her to get off, and she'd get off and walk behind, or stand behind the sleigh so the horse couldn't see her.
Yeah.
And as soon as he thought she wasn't there, it would just take off. And then my mom would have to run like crazy to catch up and jump on again from the back, because then the horse wouldn't see her. And as we got a little older, I guess Marie and Dal were already going to school. And in the wintertime, my mom would take us to school in the sleigh. And in the summertime, we all rode one horse, because it was about 3 or 4 miles to school.
You mean 3 of you?
All 3 of us on one horse.
Yeah.
My brother was at the front, because he's the boy and he could steer. And my sister would sit in the middle with one arm around him and her right arm around me to hold me on, and her left hand around him to make sure that she didn't fall off.
Right.
No saddle, And so my brother, some little friend would come along on his horse and, want to race us. And Dal couldn't resist, and so he'd just dig his heels in, and we'd go like crazy, and Marie would pinch him, and we'd all fall off, because he'd get mad and try to hit her.
Is that right?
And all 3 of us would fall off, and then we'd have to walk the horse to a place where we could stand, where the ditch was high enough that we could get back on this bare-backed horse. And that was fun. It wasn't fun, but in the summertime we didn't mind.
You were in grade 1 then,
I was in grade 1. Marie and Dal were in 2 and 3. And but we had concerts, Christmas concerts, and little plays they would put on. And I remember I was a bunny in one. And I remember at recess they used to let all the kids out, and we'd go play over the wood pile.
Yeah.
We'd be building a fort with all these blocks of wood that we should be leaving alone. And at lunchtime we'd go and work on our fort, and it was fun. And then we moved to a place called Harmattan, and I must have been 7 by this time, because my mom was expecting a baby, and that was Harley.
Oh, yeah.
Well, first of all, she had a miscarriage. She lost triplets.
I see.
And the following year, she was pregnant again and afraid of losing it, and so she had to be put in the hospital for a month before he was born. And my dad had to look after us and work. And he worked at a farm about a mile away.
Now, Harmattan is somewhere around Olds, too, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they're all these little towns are near Olds.
Yeah.
Because she had gone into Olds to have the baby.
Right.
And it was 30 miles away, and we had no car. So friends would drive him in to visit her once a week or something like that. And he would take us with him and stay overnight, and then visit her tomorrow and come home. While the friends shopped, of course. Right. But while she was in the hospital, we were dirt poor. My dad worked, but it was just enough to get by. And I remember that a pound of butter was 17 cents.
Is that right?
I remember a pound of sugar was 13.
Wow.
Because we would go. Of course, we got milk from the farm, and we got eggs from the farm where he worked. So we managed, but I can remember my dad, a helpless man, if you ever saw one, cooking. And we had a big garden, and he would take stuff out of the garden to cook for us, but like, we had popping corn growing out there too, and it was really ripe. Harley was born in August, so the corn was ripe, and I remember him popping it for us.
Sure.
And I remember what he would make us for lunch is bread spread with lard and sugar sprinkled on it.
Wow.
That was our lunch.
Boy, oh boy.
Yuck. I couldn't eat that now.
Really?
Yeah, it was really rough. But anyway, then she finally had Harley, who was actually a twin, but the twin was dead. So, and she brought him home. And I don't ever remember resenting him. Like, I was 7, and if I was spoiled, I don't know how I could have been spoiled, because we had no money. But when Harley came along, he was just really neat, you know, to have a baby in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved to Zella, and that was probably around Didsbury.
Oh.
And I remember going to grade 2 and 3 there, and Marie will tell you that I was spoiled. It was about the time of Shirley Temple,
I see.
and all the little curls and ringlets, you know, and my mom would curl my hair for
yeah.
school, but Marie never got hers curled, and so she feels that I was
Pampered.
special. Yeah, I was pampered, I guess. But anyway, I can remember various things about that. It was 3 miles as well, and we had to walk to school. And in the wintertime, I guess we wore boots if we had them. I can't remember. Scarves around our faces. It was really cold. And I can remember my brother telling me to come and put your tongue on this fence and taste it. And of course it was ice. And my tongue stuck to it, and he knew it would. He was a brat. But anyway, we walked to school together, and in the summertime it was really nice because there were some neighbors. Their name was Lee, and they were a nice old couple about your age and my age, you know. And they had a farm, and they had geese and ducks, and the geese would come roaring at us when we came in the yard, but we knew they wouldn't hurt us. And she would always call us into the yard to give us a glass of milk and cookies. And then she'd give us things out of the garden to take home. And
is that about halfway home?
no, it was only half a mile from home.
Oh.
It was almost home by this time.
Mm-hmm.
But my brother used to love these animals around there, you know. And they would let him go to the, you know that picture I have in the bedroom with the pond?
Oh, yeah.
And a little boy and a bunch of geese?
Right.
Well, I bought that because it reminds me of that place.
Mm-hmm.
And Dell used to always go and collect the geese from the lake and bring them back to the yard while I was looking at her garden and stuff. And they had the first radio we ever heard.
Well.
And she used to ask the family over on Sundays to listen to, I think it was Fibber, McGee, and Molly.
Oh,
You know, various soap programs on Sundays, and Jack Benny and stuff like that. But weekdays, she had an agreement with my mom that she would, she would check on us on the way home. And so she usually called us in for a few minutes, and they were really nice people. But we never had a horse there. Our neighbors all rode horses to school, but we had to walk because we had no horse. And in the summertime, when we went to school, we only had 1 pair of shoes each, not like 30 like you've got today.
yeah.
But we only had 1 pair each, and so if it was raining or muddy, we had to walk to school in bare feet, take a face cloth and our shoes in a bag, bare feet. And when we got to school, we put our shoes and socks on.
Is that right? Wipe your
Save
feet
our
off?
shoes. Yeah, we'd have to wash our feet at school.
You couldn't wear your
Shoes, no,
shoes
we'd
to
ruin
school.
them. And so by this time I was 8 or 9. And when we moved to Calgary, I was 9 and a half.
Oh.
No, I was just 9 because I started school in Tuxedo Park.
So you
School.
moved to the North Hill?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, when we moved to town, it was the first time I didn't know what waxed floors were. Like my mother in Zella, my dad worked at a farm for some people named Ingham, and they were very rich and they had a wonderful big house. And my mom used to go there twice a week and clean her house for her. Mm-hmm. And when she'd come home, she'd tell us about, we'd say, what did you do there? And she'd say, well, I washed and waxed the floors today. And we thought, wax the floors? How could she? Did she melt paraffin? Or how could you spread this? And we didn't know what a wax floor was. Ours was bare pine.
Oh, yeah.
A bare pine floor, which we had to scrub lengthways to make sure there were no streaks on it. Mm-hmm. And Marie and I did this. Dell and I used to cut the wood and stack it and bring it in the house and everything. And in school, as a matter of fact, that was one of my brother's jobs, is to stack the wood, bring the wood in for school and keep the fire going.
Oh,
And in that school, there were 8 grades, from 1 to 8, and 1 teacher, and her name was Miss Kirker. And I remember my mom and dad discussing her wages one day. She made $90 a month.
90?
90, plus room and board where she stayed, not far from Ingham's, where my dad worked. My dad at this time was making $20 a month. $20. So you can see we were poor. But anyway, they used to go into town with some friends of theirs who did have a car. They'd go into Didsbury, and there was a Salvation Army there. And my mom and dad would bring this friend, showed them how you could do this. You go in and you buy a box of clothing, and my mom would pick a box that had some fairly big clothing in it, and she would bring it home. And she would make our clothes out of old clothes that she got at Sally Young.
Oh, yeah.
And like, for instance, if there was a dress that she could cut piece, like she'd undo all the seams, and she'd cut the pattern out of what material she had, and she'd make us dresses.
Yeah. So she made pretty nice dresses.
She did, and she sewed it by hand. She had no sewing machine.
Boy, she was
And she sewed coats for us, even. But I remember one time, I have to go back to Zella here, and I was about 7, so we had only been there a little while, and they were working at Ingham's. And my mom, while Dad was at work, would do canning and out of the garden and stuff. And it was strawberry season, and Della and I had to go out and pick the strawberries. So we picked all day, and we'd bring home enough for her to can. So she canned jars and jars of strawberries, these little tiny strawberries. And she did, I don't know how many jars she did, but what was left, she put a pie plate on top of, and we were going to have it for supper. But we didn't have it for supper that night for some reason. We had it the next day. And we had all got poisoned because the pie plate she had on it was rusted.
Oh.
And we got ptomaine poisoning.
Is that right?
And we were all so sick we nearly died.
Was throwing up?
Yeah. I guess my dad didn't have any because he went to Ingham's and told them the problem. Like, we had no phone or anything. So he had to walk all the way to their place, which was a mile. And he told them, and they drove him back, and they brought a quart or two of thick cream, whipping cream, like, we call it, and made us drink it. So it made you really, it cleaned your stomach out. And we were sick. And I guess because I was so used to being the baby, I can remember this and still feel guilty about it to this day. I remember that I still slept in a crib. There were beds for the other 2 kids, but I still had to sleep in the crib, because that's all there was. And I can remember that when Mrs. Ingham came up to see how we were doing, I was really playing the part.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, I can remember that. But anyway, the next day she came and brought a bolt of material, of beautiful voile, pale green print. Oh, it was just heavenly. We never had a dress so pretty. And my mom made us each a new dress.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, out of this, she brought it as a present, So I can remember that dress. It had a circle skirt, and I can remember wearing it to school and twirling and sitting down quick so that it would be a whole circle around me. What a vain little brat I was.
Yeah.
I wasn't vain. I just had never had anything so beautiful.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was at this house that my dad took us. I told you the story about how he took us out to the woods, which were sparse. I mean, they weren't really woods, but there were patches of bush here and there. And he would take my brother and I. It was nearly Easter, and he took us out with a dozen eggs that he got from Ingham's.
Yeah.
And had this idea that if we could put them under birds' nests, and they would hatch, we'd have chickens of our own.
Oh.
And it was nearly Easter, and so he said, okay, let's try this. So he took Dell and I out. I don't think Marie, just Dell and I. Marie she always stayed with Mom and helped with the baking and stuff. But the 2 of us went with him, and for every nest that was in that bush, we put 1 or 2 eggs.
Yeah.
And if it was a hawk's nest, we didn't even try, because we knew they'd destroy it. But if it was an owl's nest, we thought that was pretty close to the shape of a real egg. And so we took out their eggs and put in the chicken egg. And crows' nests and magpies' nests. And So we used up the dozen eggs, and we came home, and we were so excited because we knew that we were going to have some chicks. We thought we were.
Yeah.
And so he knew that in 21 days those things would hatch. So and we counted the days off on the calendar. And on the 21st day, he took us back, and we found 4 live chicks.
You did. Gee, that's amazing.
We were so excited. We brought them home and put them behind the stove in a box and fed them. And I don't know what happened to them, but that was exciting. You know how pets kind of wear off.
Yeah.
Oh, they actually did. And then we moved to Calgary that summer, I guess, and that was embarrassing because we went to tuxedo school. I was 9 by then. And we moved to this house that was wonderful. It had an upstairs, it had a basement which we'd never seen before. It had a furnace which we didn't even know existed. A furnace, imagine. A wood furnace, to be sure, but it was a furnace. And taps and running water and all this exciting stuff that we'd never even
New invention.
talked about or heard about. Boy, were we dumb. But anyway, my dad was looking for work, and he couldn't seem to find any at first. And his neighbor, they were very friendly. My mom and dad made friends very easily.
Yep.
And the people next door were named Davidson, I remember. And the lady was wonderful, and she was a redhead, and she was beautiful. But the man, my parents didn't like, and we felt that they didn't like him much, but they did, you know, socialize with them still. And one day this Mr. Davidson came home and said, I got a job for you, Ike. They called my dad Ike.
Yep.
So my dad said, where, you know, and so he said, well, just come with me. And he took him to, of all places, the, what do you call it, where you sign up for the army or something?
Recruiting center.
Recruiting center. He took him. And my mom was excited. She thought he was going to come home with a job. And then when he came home and told her what it was, that he had signed up for the army, she cried. I never saw her like that. She was hysterical. She was crying and crying and crying. And we didn't know what the matter was. And she went over next door and she told that Mr. Davidson a piece of her mind. She said she was not going to have her husband killed, that there was no way he should have to go to war with 4 children.
So
5.
what
He
year
had
was
5
that?
by this time. It must have been
41.
39.